Thank you, Joanna, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm really, really honored to be here. I was very grateful when Joanna invited me to speak on the topic of leading cross-sector collaborations. And I'm especially happy to be here because it was a pretty intense week for me this last week. You see, I went home for the first time in 6 years. As Joanna mentioned, home is the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, a 4-county region on the southernmost tip of Texas that borders Mexico. While I only spent the first 18 years of my life there and have lived many places since, this is where I'm from. The people in the valley are my people. It's home. I was home because a very close family member was sick, and I wanted to see her to say goodbye. My cousin, Joanna, was born in Mexico and lived with my family from time to time growing up, but she eventually returned to Mexico. And after moving back, she was not allowed to re-enter the country legally, the United States. So she lived across the border on the Mexico side. To see her, my mother and I had to cross the US-Mexico bridge, something I did often growing up, to shop or to go to dinner, or as in this case, to see family. And as we drove to the bridge this time, I stared out of the car window at the fields of produce and grain along the Rio Grande and saw pieces of fence and wall, remnants of the first attempt to build a border wall back in the 90s. Those strange structures that we passed could easily be interpreted as artistic representations of the futility of keeping humanity contained. We arrived at La Frontera, crossed over, and spent an amazing day with my cousin, her daughter, my tia, my primos, reminiscing, laughing, and telling each other how much we loved each other. The trip was bittersweet. I was there for a sad reason, but it was also incredibly meaningful because I spent a few days back in the community that helped shape who I am today. If you haven't gone home for a while, I highly recommend it. When you grow up in what the late Chicana feminist writer Gloria Anzaldúa called the borderlands, you learn quickly to navigate between worlds. You speak English and Spanish and Spanglish, often in the same day, and often you translate for others. You understand that borders are arbitrary lines that somehow make a huge difference in an individual's experience. Crossing the border on my trip home this time, I was reminded how quickly the landscape changes depending on where you are. The smells, the sounds, the sights, all take on entirely different dimensions in just a few miles. And you learn to recognize signals of who's from over there before anyone says a word. Most of us from the borderlands have family on both sides, and we learn that our cousins have different educational experiences, different opportunities, different outcomes for their lives. And that there is no right or wrong, but rather here or there. I used to take the bicultural, bilingual experience for granted and even felt sometimes like it was a burden, like I wasn't sure where I belonged. But as I have navigated the professional and academic world over the last 30 years, residing in some of the world's most amazing cities and accessing some of the most privileged spaces in our country, I now recognize that being a border crosser is a superpower. It allows you to navigate complex systems in an increasingly divided world. And that's what we do at Achieve Atlanta. At Achieve Atlanta, our vision is that Atlanta be a city where race and income no longer predict post-secondary success or upward mobility. To achieve this vision, we wholeheartedly believe that we must work in community and cross organizational borders. We in the social sector like to think of ourselves as consensus builders and team players, but we often fail to acknowledge that leading collaborations across sectors is really hard and requires particular skill and conditions. At Achieve Atlanta, we've learned that we have an obligation to build the conditions that enable informal and formal teamwork among people from different sectors and allow collaboration across organizations, disciplines, hierarchies of power and status, and even physical distance. To do this, we work to get better at a couple of key things. Skills that help us be true border crossers. First, we work at being cultural brokers. Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson studies and writes about effective teaming and leadership development. In her work, she highlights a handful of effective practices to lead cross-sector collaborations. The first is to ensure that you have cultural brokers, people who, as she writes, promote cross-boundary work in one of two ways: by acting as a bridge or as an adhesive. A bridge offers herself as a go-between, allowing people with different expertise to collaborate. Professor Edmondson says bridges are most effective when they have considerable knowledge on both sides and can figure out what each one needs. At Achieve Atlanta, our bridges lead cross-sector collaborations with multiple partners, including colleges, nonprofits, Atlanta Public Schools, and others to achieve our mission of post-secondary success for low-income and first-generation students graduating from Atlanta Public Schools. One of our bridges, Suzanne Dix-Wilborn, who's sitting over here, leads Achieve Atlanta's post-secondary success work. She worked as an organizational development consultant for many years and as an executive coach. She's also a professor. In her work, she acts as a bridge between college administrators and professors and nonprofits that are experts in personal coaching for students. Because she has extensive experience in each sector, Suzanne understands the language and the norms of each. And perhaps most importantly, she understands the motivations of our collaborators and what each needs to be successful. Similarly, Corinne Schooley, who leads our college access work, has experience working in a district and also in the philanthropic and nonprofit sector. She's navigated the complex bureaucracy of a public district and also understands how funders and independent nonprofits work. Often, there's a disconnect between these sectors about how to measure success and how quickly things can happen. Corinne plays a critical role in helping set the appropriate expectations and developing action plans for these cross-sector teams. People who act as bridges create efficiency because they help organizations work around differences without each organization having to change completely how they do their work. Adhesives, on the other hand, Professor Edmondson says, bring people together and help build mutual understanding and lasting relationships. Adhesives facilitate collaboration by vouching for people and acting as a translator. Unlike bridges, adhesives develop others' capacity to work across a boundary in the future without their assistance. Take, for example, our VP of Data Strategy, Sam Rauschenberg. Sam worked for the Georgia Office of Student Achievement under a Republican governor and administration. In order to achieve our vision at Achieve Atlanta, we know that we have to work with our state government. And while we try to stay apolitical, it's not hard to see that many of us at Achieve Atlanta are on the opposite political spectrum from the current administration. However, Sam has helped build mutual understanding across political lines. The fact that he's a leader in our office also signals Achieve Atlanta's desire to work across boundaries that are harder and harder to cross in our divisive political environment. So, being cultural brokers. Working as bridges and adhesives is the first thing we've worked on in our efforts to further develop our border crosser superpowers. The second thing we work on is listening to Kendrick Lamar to be humble. To effectively collaborate across sectors, we need to be humble and see the world through others' eyes. Here's one example. Those of us who do this work sometimes make the error of thinking that if we just give students the right information and the right data, they will make the best choices for themselves. However, in his new book, The Years That Matter Most, author Paul Tough points out that how low-income students make decisions about where to school cannot be reduced to an algorithm. Community, culture, financial circumstances all factor into student choices. Our failure to see the world through our students' eyes and to take their and their families' perspectives into account will lead us to continue to design inadequate services and solutions. Cultivating humility has another advantage. It allows us to understand and work from the perspective of the organizations we partner with. Edmondson points out that leaders of successful teams have an unusual ability to assume other people's viewpoints and speak the multiple languages of their teammates. She further cites psychological research that suggests that while many people are capable of taking others' perspectives, very few are actually motivated to do so. To successfully lead cross-sector work, we need to remind ourselves and our partners constantly that integrating diverse perspectives leads to innovation and to better solutions. It's that added boost to our superpower. So be humble. Because, como dijo el Papa Francisco, el orgullo construye muros, la humildad puentes. Pride builds walls. Humility builds bridges. Finally, we have learned that we need to bridge our own personal histories with our professional lives and be vulnerable enough to share our stories with others. Many of us were called to this work because we had similar types of life experiences that our students have. But many of us feel that we need to leave that part of our life over there, on the other side. But let's pause to think about the students that we serve. We know that upward social mobility will have a cost. To make it, our students will leave their neighborhoods, their families, and their communities. Some of us did the same. And while not all of us have a lived experience of literally crossing borders, we have all resided in different spaces and can bring those diverse experiences to our work. When we integrate all parts of our lives into a cohesive whole and share that with those we work with, we show our students that they can also do the same. They can become border crossers and bridges, adhesives, and translators. Their humanity will not be contained. In his poem, The Borders Are Fluid Within Us, the poet Dan Vera writes, I sleep and dream in two languages. I gain wisdom from more than one fountain. What a privilege to work in a space with so many fountains of wisdom. So let's drink up. Thank you.